Hopefully it looks familiar to you. We talked about it 2 days ago. It's a high level conversation this time.
Look at Jocelyn's chair.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this open briefing on the long-term plan. I'll hand over to Chris to kick us off. If everybody could take a seat. Thank you.
Kia ora. And welcome to what is a series of discussions around our long-term plan 2024-34. You have the pleasure of me, Chris Pevan, GM Strategy and Growth. For those of you joining online, you may be used to having Mark D. Haast, our GM of Corporate Services, but we're swapping places today. Today we are covering off a couple things. We're going to briefly touch in on the Council and Community Board initiatives as at a glance at next steps. We're not planning to have a discussion about that today. That's coming through on the 7th of December. I'm just signalling that up front so that when we briefly clip through that, it's just to remind you of those. Where we're really heading to today is the strategic framework for the LTP, looking for, in this discussion today, agreement, our long-term plan performance framework, again, for agreement, performance measures for agreement, and then we'll get into what's next. Just want to note that you should be familiar with the material that we're working through because we've had a series of conversations to get to the stage. So we'll get into it. So the first is the councillor initiatives.
Can I just clarify?
Yes.
The agreement is not decision, right?
No, this is so that we
thank
can
you.
continue our work. You won't technically agree the long-term plan until it's tabled, but when you see what we're tabling, you're going to go, you've actually agreed this in a paper already, but we're saying that we're using it in the framing for the LTP. So all will be revealed.
Great. I just
Run
wanna,
with me.
Want to
Thank
make
you for
clear
clarifying
that
that,
we're not
Deputy
decision
Mayor.
making in a briefing or a workshop.
No, we are not
are-
able to do that. We're
yes.
getting the nod from you that we're heading in the right direction,
Okay, great.
as we
Thank you.
have through all the steps through this discussion to date. I'm going to, if I keep going?
Yes, please.
Sorry. So councillor initiatives. So we have discussed these before, and these have not changed. So there's nothing new here. There's nothing changed. You remember that we had some additional initiatives you put on the table, and some additional revenue generating initiatives because we're looking at ways that we can, in the I'll say short to medium term and longer term, reduce the burden on rates increases over time. There was also community board initiatives. So you recall that we went through a similar process. You'll see some things on the list that are familiar. Again, initiatives and initiatives that might support new revenue stream opportunities. And we'll be coming back to you on next steps with that on the 7th of December. Council staff at the moment are just working through how these initiatives might link back to the work that's planned by operations. So we're just trying to align that at the moment.
Sorry, I thought we weren't going to include the last two on that previous slide.
The council initiatives or the community board one?
The council ones. I'm just wondering why they're still there.
I think this is directly from the last briefing you had, so we've changed nothing. We've just left it. So take it as given that if, no, Sean's giving me that we've taken them off the list. So that's confirmed. The two at the bottom have gone, so confirming that.
Great.
Great question. There was a community board list. Right. So now we're heading into the strategic framework. So I'm just going to recap a bit of storytelling. We're proposing that the LTP strategic framework equals your council priorities. We've spent a lot of time on your council priorities. In February and March, you developed what we're calling your strategic framework around the 3 overall outcomes of focus to support sustainable development, so that you know what I'm talking about: people, place and partnership. You introduced 10 areas of priority for council work, which was your councillor priorities, and you had annual activity aligned to those. In April, you announced that framework and that you were setting strategic priorities focused on driving affordable change. In May, you agreed to go out to the community to test those. And between June and November, we've been doing that. When I say we, you've been doing that. You've had a series of engagements through the Community Hub. We've had Have Your Say feedback at an area level. You have been going out and talking to your local area about these priorities. Of the around 1,000 points of feedback we've had as at the end of November, there's been broad positive support for the priorities that you had shared with the community. There's lots of ideas about what more can be done, which we're going to be working through with you, but for the purposes of this conversation, there's been general support. So this looks a little different than what you've seen before, but for the LTP, what we're proposing is that we are using the people, place and partnership as the foundational piece for the strategic direction of the LTP. Now, these are the words that have come from some work we did with you quite a wee way ago, but it was to describe people, place and partnership. And we have been using that for our communications with the community. So in the orange box, on the orange quarter of the circle, we have one around partnership, which is where a good TTRT partner ensure that we address and prioritise issues of importance for our iwi partners. Mana whenua have a seat at our governance table, and we work together in enhancing ways for our community. So that's come from the communications material you had put together. On the other half of the upper circle, there is another partnership quarter, which is we partner with others to connect, facilitate and advocate for the good of all in Kapiti. Our community is involved in decisions that affect Kapiti, and business, government and community groups work together to ensure resources and funds support our economic needs. In the lower half of the circle, to the bottom right, in the blue area, we have one on people, which is our people are supported to thrive and live, work and play. We have access to affordable health, housing, recreation and work opportunities, and our rights to safely connect and participate in community life give us a sense of belonging. And the last one in green is around place. Our place is resilient and livable for current and future generations. Our natural environment, water and land remains accessible, well maintained and protected from degradation, including climate change impacts as we grow and change. Now, I'm sharing this today to say that this is, if you like, the stakeholder we're putting in the ground around the strategic direction for the LTP that we would be coming back to you in further conversations on. As we start to land the long-term plan, there is always opportunities to refine and wordsmith, but this reflects the substantive comment and work that we'd progressed to date. So we wanted to share that today to say this is, as we start to develop what is the strategic direction component of the LTP, this is going to sit in that front piece.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Just with regard to cultural well-being, I'd be very disappointed if we're taking just that one narrow view of what we mean by cultural well-being. The others are very general in their scope, very wide in their scope, and I think there is a lot more to cultural well-being than our partnership with iwi.
I'm going to take that as a point to follow up on, and we'll come back to you. Is that all right?
Yeah.
I completely agree with that point.
Yep.
Yeah, very good.
So we'll come back. We'll come back, and as I said, this was the original work we've done, so we can test in that as we start to move forward. But obviously linked to creativity and culture and all the broader arts. And yes, I
And
hear
other
you.
cultures, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
Chinese, you know, we
Great.
get a lot of immigrants into our
Yep.
area, and yeah.
So we'll look to refine the words in that, and it may be is
So
that we.
the second sentence of that is kind of wrapped up. It's a subset of the first, right? If we're a good utility partner.
Yeah.
then
So we might be
those
able to
things
look at the
happen anyway.
second.
So we just replace that second sentence
Yep.
with something around
So-
broader cultural well-being.
Yeah. So what I think we might do is come back to you with an option based off the other material that we've got, and then we can insert that in there.
Sounds good.
Sound good?
We can always take the vision statement from our culture strategy, can't we?
Hmm.
Martin?
Yeah, look, I appreciate we've got the four well-beings here. I was just curious to know, look, you know, we get told time and time again from the community, bricks and mortar, bricks and mortar, bricks and mortar, and that sort of stuff. Make sure you get your infrastructure sorted first. So I'm just curious to know, where does infrastructure requirement fit in? I know we've got work programs in place and that sort of stuff, but where does it fit in with regards to what we discuss in here?
So this circle is obviously not how you used to seeing your people, place and partnership priorities. The next slides we go through, you're going to see something familiar, which is your A3 with people, place and partnership. And it's right in the middle of that. So under
that's cool.
place, we've got infrastructure. So this is just lifting up the high level comments around people, place and partnership so that we can describe them as outcomes, as our community outcomes.
So
If
if you
that
think
makes
about
sense.
it, you couldn't have the first sentence in that green box without good infrastructure.
Oh no, I appreciate that. I did do a quick flick through for a few things. I was just more curious where it does fit in.
Yeah. So a lot of that is in the place space.
Can you help me with the community outcomes box on the top right-hand corner?
Can you go back to it, please?
I've done it on my screen, not yours. Sorry.
It just says by a strengthened, is it strengthened or strengths-based or strengths focus on the wording? There's a spelling mistake. I'm not quite sure what word it's meant to be.
Oh, it's meant to be strengthened.
Strengthened.
A
okay.
strengthened focus.
Okay.
That will be for refinement.
Do you know what? I think I'm going back to Martin's point because just having another look at it, I think it would be good to have the word infrastructure in that circle because it's really important. Sean's smiling.
And the green one.
So, you know, our place, why don't we have our infrastructure
Can
and environment
if
is
I
resilient and
if I may just go to the next slide for a second. This should be familiar to you. And in here we have priority A, which talks about develop a plan to address inland flooding and ponding, stormwater infrastructure and the impacts of 3 water reforms. I'm going to go back to the one before it. This came from the piece of work you did that lifted it up one level to talk more broadly about the community outcomes around people, place and partnership. We can definitely refine this and come back and test that it's got the right pieces in it. But that's where that's come from. So it's directly from the document that you'd been developing together. So if you want to add some more words into any of these or refine them, we can do that.
Yeah, I just think that's a really good point, and it's something we can control, you know, as our infrastructure.
Yep.
Whereas, you know, and that's how we kind of control it. So I'd just replace place with infrastructure because then we've got environment in the second sentence. Anyway, just a thought.
So maybe we can come back to that and the top one and see what we land.
Yeah.
So the team will be coming back with more detail. So this was just really to set the scene of, in the long-term plan, we've got our 4 well-beings. We have referenced the link to people, place and partnership, which we'll refine given these comments. And this is really going to set the scene for the long-term plan. This is a little bit different to what we would have done in previous long-term plans. So we're bringing in your council priorities so that you can see how they fit in. And also share this with anyone who's watching today. Shall I keep going? Great.
Oh,
No?
Lawrence?
Oh,
I hadn't turned off, but Yeah, I'll have a look at those, the wording in some of those, because
Great.
I'm a little bit concerned about community groups under economic well-being. They probably wouldn't see themselves as being that. They're probably more in social well-being rather than.
So we can refine that then.
So there's probably some
Yeah,
working around
so we can
that,
do
yeah.
refinement. And it might be because we've presented it along aside the well-beings, that it's not a completely one-to-one relationship.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
let's come back and we'll refine. Is everyone happy with that?
Sounds good.
Okay, this should be very familiar to you. This is your priorities that we've worked a lot on. Well,
We don't like them anymore.
no. So what I'm just going to talk through briefly is what are they? What are these? So obviously we've gone out to the public. These are on our webpage. It's the top 10 strategic priorities, and there's a page for 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26. And the idea is we introduce this first in the annual plan for 23, 24 as a framework for that, and we're continuing on with it. As you see things come onto the page, it's the beginning of something. It doesn't mean it's completed. Not everything will be completed in a year. Some things will go for 3 to 5 years, depending on what they are. Some might be ongoing. So if I pick infrastructure as an example, it's going to be continued. So really what's here on the page is a commitment in our partnership with Mana Whenua and some targeted actions each year. There's, and I'll use place as an example, the place box has got a little arrow pointing to the right that says your needs, followed by our priority and targeted action. And for people who've come to the Engagement Hub, they would have had a good chance to talk to us about this, but essentially your needs as referring to things in the community that are important. And sometimes you'd call those outcomes, but we've called them needs, so that it's really clear what we're talking about. An example of needs under place is looking after our rivers, streams and oceans, ensuring supporting infrastructure is resilient and in top condition. Another need is making the most of our land so that we meet the needs of current and future residents in a sustainable way. And the last one we have here is a healthy, enhanced natural environment for us to live as a part of, so that we are resilient to climate change as our population grows. The next arrow after our needs is your needs is our priority. So this was what we're putting on the table as focus for the long-term plan. So aligned to the first need around rivers and streams and good supporting infrastructure, our priority is developing a plan to address inland flooding and ponding, stormwater infrastructure, and the impact of Three Waters reforms. In relation to good land use, our priority is to implement a good growth strategy that balances needs for housing and our environment via appropriate district and regional spatial planning. And the last one being around a healthy, enhanced natural environment and resilience to climate change. We said our priority was to develop the climate strategy to reach our bold emissions reduction goals and the environment strategy to also have a state of the environment and to work out how we're enhancing it. So that's very familiar to you. And next to that is the actions. So the actions are listed for 23, 24 on this page, and they'll be familiar to you. For the first need focused on waters, our actions were to deliver the stormwater infrastructure program to upgrade systems, future-proof them and increase drainage capacity, and to use the whole of catchment focus. For the good growth and good land use, our actions this year were to drive solutions around good growth, to work in partnership to ensure accountability for environmental goals, improve safety.
Chris,
And
are you going to go through all the
No, I'm
boxes?
not. I'm just doing this so that we've got an understanding of how this is working. Just to share, not only with you, but also anyone who's listening, what we're looking
It's all
at.
good.
Yeah. So I'll be very brief.
So, and to be clear, this document's on the council website. and
Absolutely,
people
on the
can
council
read it.
website,
Yep.
so that we're just going to look at place and then we'll move on. And the last one being to introduce the emissions reduction target this year, to have a climate strategy and environment strategy, and be a role model for sustainable practice. And so you've got the same thing for people in partnership. Then what happens is, this was year one. There's needs, priorities and actions we've just stepped through. You get to year two, The same needs and priorities are there, we just have new actions. So I'm not going to go through those, but it is online to read. And the last one is year 3 plus same needs and priorities and the new actions. So that's the strategic framework. And aside from the comments about refining some of the wording, our proposition is that we would be utilising that as the framework that you're going to see coming through for the LTP. Not getting agreement today, but a nod that that's familiar to you and we're heading in the right direction. No disagreeing nods. Oh, shake the head. Okay, so LTP performance framework. Okay, so I just want to touch briefly on requirements for performance reporting. The Local Government Act requires that LTPs have activities and outcomes in them. The activities around what is it we're doing and then how we'll measure performance around that. The second bit is around what the council is trying to achieve and how we'll measure its performance and progress towards achieving those. For activities, we're not proposing any substantive change to the activities from the last triennium. Those activities are infrastructure, services or community services, regulation and district planning, partnership and organisational health. So we have mandatory performance measures that will continue to report alongside some additional measures where there's no mandatory measure set. For outcomes, we're going to be focused on place, people and partnership as our primary outcomes of focus, and we're going to have our top 10 priorities, and we'll be measuring progress against those through some new impact measures where we're going to look to see whether our desired direction of change is headed where we would like it to as a result of what we do. Everyone's comfortable with that?
Yep.
So,
Yes, Jocelyn?
Yes, I have a question. So it says there's no substantive changes to the activities, but the outcomes are going to change.
We're bringing in your council priorities as our framework, so that's what's changing. But the activities that we do, the description and list of activities that we have, aren't going to change.
So that's at the high level?
Yes,
Or
that's at the high
but
level.
underneath that there will be some changes?
Underneath that, we'll still be reporting against the work we do. Under infrastructure, for example, there's transport, there's water, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, there's sustainability and resilience. That's going to continue to be what we deliver, so that remains unchanged, just as an example. So that's what we looked at with you on Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just let this run and see. Okay, thank you.
All right, so briefly, we talked in a bit of detail about the strategic framework, and the point of doing so was just to say we're applying that framework to our performance, as you'd expect. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, we've got for place, the your needs, our priority and targeted action. Underneath that, we've just got an explanation of how that links back to our performance. So under your needs, you'll see it says outcome. So the your needs section is going to inform the outcomes that we focus on around place, people and partnership. Our priority is going to have impact measures associated with each priority so that we're able to show progress to achieve the outcomes. And the targeted action is our activity. So we'll have output for delivering action, and that will include our normal level of service measures that people will be familiar with. So I'm going to jump right onto the right-hand side of this page and say there's some blue boxes at the top of the screen that say activities and or actions that we deliver. To the left of that says drives change, the next box, and the behaviours or community settings that we want to shift, which indicate, last box, progress to achieve our community outcomes. So I'm just showing you the flow of how our measures will link together to report on our outcomes. So essentially, if I look at the place boxes, on the very right-hand side under the activities, it says mandatory measures and activity. The LOS is level of service. So there are things that we already have in place that you'll be familiar with. They're going to continue to be in that space. Under the impacts or behaviours in the community, there's a little bit of change in here which we'll talk you through, but essentially we are trying to introduce some measures this year which provide more evidence of the difference that we're making by the actions that we have in the community. And lastly, the outcomes which we talked about was obviously the place people in partnership. And so we'll have an overall measure which shows our progress against that, which we step through.
So, Chris, I've got a question about this table. Are your needs and our priority in the first two boxes, are they placeholders, or have we just got a whole lot of boxes saying the same thing?
It was meant to be for each of the priorities. So A, B, C, D, E, F, etc. We would have measures coming through. So we're picking them up on the way through. And this is just to give an example of how the flow works. In the next section, we're going to come to what are the actual measures that we're going to look at. So they are placeholders in that respect.
Okay, so is this a table for our information or one that we're going to publish?
It's for your information.
Great.
So
Thank you.
this is just a step through what we're doing.
Great.
So that all we're doing today really is wanting to get to the measures that we're putting on the table and how we've got to that. So we are making some changes and just describing why.
Brilliant. Thank you.
That got us through the LGP performance framework. So now we're going to get to the bigger stuff, which is the performance measures. And I do want to say, in the pack that is online and will be available for reading, and the pack you have in LG Hub, in Appendix 1 of the document, we've got some long lists of measures, which we are not going to step through in specific detail today. What I did want to say is that you were briefed on that long list of measures on the 28th. So you've had a chance to look at those measures. You've had the opportunity to question that list, and you did provide some feedback. And today I'm going to talk to you about some of the feedback that we're bringing into that list of measures. And also we talked about the fact that we have a longer term work program underway around our outcomes framework and our performance framework, where we'll be looking to see if we need to develop new measures or new information and to make sure that we're reporting on the things that we want to over time. So, due to your feedback, 7 new level of service performance measures are proposed and 7 impact measures. So we are going to look at those today. 38 measures were removed from the 23-24 list that had previously been reported in the annual report, as they were not considered to be relevant and were replaced. And I have got a list of those and can provide more detail for people who are interested. But essentially, in the main, they've been replaced by another measure that we think is better. The service level performance for the suite of measures will be discussed on 7th of December. So what I mean by that is that's the goals or targets that we put in place. We're not going to land those today. We'll be talking about that on the 7th. Because we'd like to do so as we're talking about your desired rates level for 24-25. I understand previously you'd had a conversation about where there's situations such as transport where the cost of delivery is increasing, the impact of our desired rates level will potentially have an impact on our service delivery level. So that might be an example of where we may not be able to maintain current levels of service. We have to have that conversation though. So I'm just signalling that that might be for further discussion. So this is in response to your elected member feedback, what we're proposing to introduce in addition to the list of measures that you saw on the 28th of November. So I'm going to pause for a second and say there's new measures proposed in place for sustainable land use, climate change resilience. There's one new measure for people around networked and connected communities, and there's one on partnership, largely. There's more than one. These are the areas where we're adding things in around improving trust and confidence. So the sustainable land use was around a request for level of service to report on resource consents monitored and complaints from resource consents received, and a new impact measure around the regulatory actions undertaken as a result of that. For place, a new level of service measure was requested around education programs, and the impact measure for that around our missions target and our progress against that. For people, 3 different areas. One was around the CWB network. So we've added in for a level of service measure, number of people walking the CWB and the utilisation of the network. And I just want to acknowledge here that there was quite a bit of discussion in the background by staff around what we own and what we don't, and therefore what we report. This is an area that we want to come back and do some more work with you over the longer term, but they were things that we can report now. Shall I go through the list, or do you want to take questions?
When do these get checked by the relevant teams or people for achievability and appropriateness?
So SLT has been working with the business to do that, to get this to the table. So we're not talking about levels of service with you at the moment. We're talking about the measures that we'd put on the table that would have a level of service related to it, and that'll come back on the 7th.
So even measures should be checked with the appropriate people who are delivering the service.
Yeah, we have done that.
Great. Thank you.
Shall I keep going? Yes. Okay.
So, so I've got a question. Would you like me to wait until you've gone through them all?
If I could.
Okay,
Yeah, if we could
okay.
get through them, that'd be great, Jocelyn. Thank you.
Then there's one around emergency management and recovery, the number of education programs delivered for the level of service measure and impact measure currently being percentage of a community that feels well informed. I just want to note, and James, my colleague from regulatory, is down the back, we're just checking in with REMO around those measures because we agree that we're aligning to that, so they'll be slightly judged to make sure they reflect the measure that REMO reports. There's a new measure around museums and art galleries, and actually it's targeted around art gallery because we do not operate or own the museums, so it's hard for us to report in terms of our performance against something that's not ours. So the call was, for now at least anyway, to and because we can report this, to focus on the number of people who access as a level of service measure and as the impact measure, to look at feedback, and it was around rating positively, which was what you had discussed, being interested in understanding. Heading into the partnerships zone, we had a focus on ensuring people can engage with council around concerns and complaints. And so we've added in the level of service measure, number and percentage of service requests closed, and that was in response to some feedback from you around making sure that we close the loop, that we are closing off the requests that come in. iwi partnership, a new measure coming in around the partnership agreement being reviewed, being completed as agreed. And lastly, for council operations, legislative requirements, we have made an adjustment to the impact measure, number and percentage of complaints are referred and upheld to the Ombudsman, PSC and OAG, which is what we had talked to you about. Oh, yes, I see what you're saying. The service zone, we're going to say that council has fit for purpose systems and processes. That change to be made. Thank you, Sean. Quite right. So that's the suite that we are going to be adding to that list that you saw. It will be coming back to you as we talk about the service levels. Do we want to pause for questions?
Yeah, just before we go to Jocelyn, does everybody feel like that's reflecting the comments that they made at the workshop on Tuesday?
Can I make a comment that it won't be all of the comments you've made? So we've got a long list that we had put up on the backboard that I'm going to send around to you, because some of the things you're interested in we don't measure at the moment. Some of the things you're interested in, we're going to have to do a bit more work to come back on. It isn't something that we can say would meet the SMART requirements for the LTP. So that's the specific, measurable, attributable, reliable. There's a T target, isn't it? Timely, thank you, timely. And so we have to do a bit more work around some of them. And so the proposition is that we'd be working on a broader suite of measures with you over time.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Jocelyn?
You think? Thanks, Chris. So I just looking at these, and also just quickly looking at Appendix 1. I then are going back to B, which says implement a good growth strategy that balances the needs for housing in our environment. So in this list here and in Appendix A, I can't actually see anything there that is a measure of the impacts on our environment. And I suppose I know that was discussed quite a lot the other day when these measures were being developed, but also in the Climate and Environment Subcommittee about having a state of the environment process, so that you can actually see how these impacts play a part, particularly with the level of urban development that may occur. I could get into some very specific examples, but I think just at a higher level, I can't see anything in here that brings that through.
Yeah, I think the state of the environment dashboard that I think you're referring to, that is going to be something that we're developing, and it is one of the actions that will be talked to as something we progress in this triennium, but we don't have that dashboard in place yet. And as we develop that, and I will say, I'm going to say it carefully, we improve our performance information over time. If there's something useful in that we think we want to use as new measures over time, we can, but we have not done that work. So we have put that on the list of things to progress with you that don't fit into this list at this time.
So I hear that, and I know it hasn't been done yet, but it's a case of where if it's actually not in this process, then if it's not met, there's no ramifications.
I'm just going to
If it, maybe it's at a higher level, we don't actually, so I'm not saying that we need the word about having a dashboard in there, but we need to have something in there that actually measures the impacts of, it's basically human activity on our environment.
Sorry, I'm just looking at, I'm just going back to
James is coming in to help.
Well, I was
Thank
just
you,
going to say,
James.
Can I just note though, just Jocelyn, on the 24-25 Year 2 priorities list, it says here, report on the state of the environment as a targeted action. So that is something that we are going to be talking about in the long-term plan. So it is here. It is going to be something that we're pushing forward, but we have not put a specific action in that says complete the development of the state of the environment dashboard.
So I suppose there's two parts to this. One is actually completing it. One is actually doing something about the outcome of that, which is what is the nub of this. If things are actually being degraded, it's not going to be measured.
We'll let James have a go now.
Thank you. Look, I think I understand where Jocelyn's coming from, and it's a conversation I had as recently as yesterday with GW, and getting a better understanding of their state of the environment reporting as well as the monitoring that they do, and how we embed that and fold that in so that we can present to you and our community an integrated picture on top of the resource consent monitoring that we'll be reporting on and the stuff out of there. So I think, as Chris says, our own dashboard will be a work in progress alongside the development of the environment strategy, but actually GW are doing a lot of this stuff already. I did have a frank conversation with them yesterday about how often we see that. and how often that monitoring is fed back to us. I actually know the answer to that, and we don't get it. So I'm picking up on Jocelyn's point that there is a whole lot of synergies we can do together with them. I'm not sure if that helps address your question.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I know that there is a GW component, but there's also activities that we are doing in KCDC that are actually out of the orbit of GW. For example, and I know this is getting into detail, but this is some of the things that I'm flagging is that, when you have developments, the impacts on our environment in terms of trees and vegetation is not captured. When questions have been asked what percentage of vegetation we have in this district, no one actually knows. And unless it's actually captured somewhere, and I'm not saying that it actually needs to go on here, but there needs to be some thought processes that actually ensure that that has been captured, and actually ensuring that we don't have developments like this over here that have, basically a denuded of all vegetation.
I think I might be able to help with that one, Jocelyn. You had proposed some measures that relate to some of these points, and we have noted those down on our long list of information that we know is important. Because we don't have it to hand now, and it would take work to do, we want to come back to the table to say to you, we've had a look at it. To be able to monitor this kind of thing, this is what it would take, and this is what we'd need to do. Because there will be a cost associated with any new informational measures that we want to collect. So it's not that we have it and don't want to put it in. We don't have some of that information at the moment, and we're not collecting it in a reliable way that would enable us to put it into the long-term plan for now. And I hope that as we get into the environmental dashboard, that might be a good place to be able to have a really fulsome view of what's happening in our environment as a result of what we're doing.
Yeah. So I hear that, and I'm sorry to harp on about this, but I also know that this in some respects does actually feed into the regulatory space, because if you have some of these measures tied into our district plan that need to be met, then they are a requirement, and then it comes under the monitoring through James's group.
Look, I think you're highlighting an area that's really important and really important to us all. So we're just, I think staff have got the message that we need to progress from that long list, that work.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And there's some really meaningful and useful ideas that have been put on the table that we'll be coming back to you on, which we won't cover today.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn. Where's the red?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Gone.
Mm.
Me.
Oh, Darren.
Thank you. I do just want to remind us we're at 12%, and anything that we add comes at a cost. You know, it's really important. This is the chunky end of setting ourselves right for the next 3 years, and we talk about being financially prudent. And whilst it's nice to have all the bells and whistles, we aren't a wealthy council that has a massive revenue generating commercial arm sitting on the side of us. So it's just, sometimes we have to be prudent and be mindful of what it is that we're requesting. We will do the best that we can in the current environment, but we won't be able to deliver everything for you.
Yeah, I think what was really useful in that, one of the really useful things that came up during that discussion, though, was when James started talking about how we work with Greater Wellington, because advocacy doesn't cost us very much, and forming better partnerships doesn't cost us very much. And I know that Councillor Pavanov has been quite proactive recently in encouraging us how we work with Greater Wellington, submit into their processes to make sure that we're holding them to account on the environment in our district. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. Councillor Coe?
Thank you. I think I must be half asleep or something, because I'm not sure what this table here represents. This is new LTP measures in addition to the ones that were reported on last time.
So the list of measures you saw on Tuesday,
Yeah.
and you went and had a look at, these have been added to that list as a result of the feedback that you gave us. So these were things that we could do right now in response to the feedback that we had. You've given us other things you think we should look at,
All right, so these are added onto that big long
Yes.
list.
which
Aren't
is
some
and
of them replacing some of the ones on that list
some-
rather than
no,
being
these
added?
have been added.
So we're keeping all of the old ones.
We're keeping, well, some of the ones that you gave us have been adjusted. Some of the terminology has been adjusted, but in the main they've stayed as they lay. So there wasn't any suggestion from anyone that we've got recorded to delete measures that were on that list. So you've asked for new information, and the problem is that the same conversation about can we report on the percentage of vegetation that meets the requirements of the district plan, good information to have, we don't have it. And so we, if we couldn't replace them, have said we need to do more work, essentially. And so we'll be coming back to talk to you about it.
I'm still really confused about the process here, and I don't think we want to end up with a huge, great big long list of performance measures. I think we need to be somehow refining them down to the ones that actually matter and make, where we get the biggest bang for buck. And I think with some of them, the wording is crucial in how they flow together. I mean, I'm just looking at this one, provision and support for museums and art gallery services. And we're measuring that by how many people go to Mahara Art Gallery. It just doesn't seem to match up. So yeah, I'm just it just seems a bit kind of clunky, the whole process here, and unwieldy.
So the composition of measures on the list that came to you came from our work with activity managers, so the people running the business,
Yeah,
went through our SLT and were in the list that was tabled with you.
right.
A portion of those measures are mandatory and required. The majority of those are in the transport and the water space, the majority of them. So we have to report those in some way. We've taken out a huge amount of measures. So we dropped 38 measures through the process we went through, the majority of which, I mean, I'm getting to this, were residents' opinion surveys. But if we are reporting against the things that link to the activities that we're required to report against through the Local Government Act, and then our progress towards the outcomes. That's why we stepped you through that. So that's what it links to.
Is that all right, Liz?
It just seems very confusing and clumsy. That's all. I mean, there must be a better way to get to the nub of what we need to do here and to sort out the wording. And as an overarching thing, I would have thought that getting customer feedback is of prime importance. So things like the number of percent of service requests closed has nothing in there to do with timeliness or how satisfied people felt at the end of it. So I mean, how do
we can go to the long list if you'd like to. So we can go to Appendix 1 and go through line by line.
No.
But that's the counter to this
But
is
it just seems really clumsy and unwieldy. That's what I'm saying. We've got this massive.
that's not the only measure related to customer service though. So
But that's where seeing that table in isolation I'm finding it hard to get my head around how that fits. with everything else.
I think so. These are the ones that came from our workshop on Tuesday that
Correct.
we feel like can be added to the
Can be
suite
added.
of performance measures that we
Right.
have.
And then so what happens to that
currently.
long list?
So I'm going to do something without getting into detail. I'm just going to quickly do this and then come back. So can I just say, at the back of this document is the measures that you looked at on Tuesday,
Yeah.
right? So these are
No
the
changes.
no
from-
change. No. Well, some minor word changes where you've said, "Hey, can you do something here?" We've taken that on board when it's minor. So they're refining the words. Fine. So you've got it there. So we had them for place, resilient waters, place, sustainable land use, and place, climate change and resilience, people, networked and connected communities, people thriving economy, people housing access, partnership involved communities, partnership delivering value locally, and partnership trust and confidence. So the measures that you worked through and saw are still there, if that makes sense. So they're there for you to look at, but there's nothing new or changed.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And if I go back to
So
this
what might
table,
help, Liz, is
that's new.
the performance measures. Some of them are new, but we've always had performance
Yeah.
measures. I think we're not thinking at a very strategic level with these. These are an opportunity that we've been given as elected members, some of whom like to be over the detail in the organisation, to have a look at these performance measures that the teams use to hold themselves to account with the day-to-day work that happens in the organisation. So for me, I'm riding through this thinking, yeah, great to have an oversight into this stuff that happens and feeds into the annual report, which is really where we look at as the
Correct.
and the quarterly reports, which is where we look at from a more broad perspective, are we meeting our objectives and
Agree.
are we doing what we said we'd do in the long-term plan? So there's a level of detail that I haven't been involved with as an elected member before, but I think it's been quite educational for us and quite a useful exercise, but I wouldn't get too
Agree.
hung up on it. And I think we've made some useful additions here. Also, we needed to have a little bit of a look at it in the light of the fact that we're replacing a bit of our residents' opinion survey work with some of this.
Correct.
So the big long list at the bottom is like the complete thing, of which includes some mandatory ones
Yes.
and some new ones that have been
Yes.
added. So what's the next step with that big long list?
So the big long list is intended, the next step for that, we will have service level measures against those, which links to funding. So this is us
So
reporting
we're not going
against.
to change the wording. Are you going to incorporate the changes that came through from the workshop on Tuesday?
Where we
that were
can.
suggested?
So where we can, because the measure, so I think that,
There's quite a
And
lot of
when
them.
we can.
and when we can, because I think some of the challenge, Liz, is what we have now and what we can report now might not be what you want. And we don't have what you want. So we're using what we have. And what we're going to do over a longer term is prioritise with you which new measures we bring in that address the things you're interested in.
So we kind of need two lists, one that we can measure now and one which is an aspirational list.
Correct.
Okay.
But to keep it simple, today we have just given you the list that's relevant to this LTP. We will come back to you with the other list so that we can work on it. Because if you had two lists today, you might be going, which one are we talking about? What are we doing? So
Well,
this
that's
is
what
part of
that's
the...
what I'm kind of
I-
asking,
yeah.
you see.
Yeah.
I'm
and
saying, is this an aspirational list or is this the
No.
list or what?
No,
you
this
know?
is not the aspirational list. This is far from the aspirational list. So this is what we can do now. And we've made some improvements to what we had, I think, in the last LTP. My view, removing the resident opinion survey measures that during the annual report discussions, you yourselves didn't know what they meant or why things were going up and down, and we couldn't explain that to you either. So we've put things in that we can tell you why they go up and down, because we've got control of them and them shifting. So that's the main change if I was to describe it to you. And you wanted to add in a few more. So you can look at this list and say, yes, let's add those in. Or you can say, actually, we'll just stick with the original list that staff had tabled with you, and we can come back to this list later.
Well, I think the list up there, I think that needs a bit of tweaking, you know, e.g. the Mahara Gallery thing.
If there's particular measures that you're interested in,
So the Mahara Gallery has to report back against a whole suite of
Yes,
requirements
yes.
outside and
It does.
outside this. These are
Yeah.
kind of very measurable kind of outcome-based things. We talked quite extensively about this at our table, and so it's not up to council staff to really comment on things like the quality of the exhibitions and in terms of people's satisfaction with the exhibitions that they see or anything like that. That would be a work stream that we'd have to ask the gallery to do.
Yeah.
And so
And we don't run
really,
the gallery
really we
as
want to
such.
see a lot of people coming in that door. So that's why our table came up with this recommended measure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is where this came from. So it's a starting point, and I'm trying to say this carefully. We are focusing on measures that meet, that help us say what we're doing, and an indication of how they help us improve the needs that we see in the community that we want to respond to. They won't be the most perfect measure that we aspirationally want. We'll have to build those over time if that's important. And we feel we need to look at the whole package with you and determine what's most important to work on first. So hopefully that is helpful, which is why you're only seeing a handful of new additions from the engagement with you. We will send around the longer list, but I didn't want to send it before today because I thought it might have been too confusing with two separate lists coming your way.
Is it possible to measure people using the cycleways and walkways and so on?
I will hand it. Yep, we got yes.
Okay. All right.
So every measure here we've put down, we are confident we can measure now. So we only put things on we could measure, and we thought that they met the SMART requirements that align to reporting in the LTP.
Jocelyn?
Yeah, thank you. So, so just following up on what Liz was saying, a while ago, it was in one of our meetings, Liz queried one of the 100% targets being met to do with the ED, I think, strategy. And the feedback from that wasn't one of the measures that we're measuring against. So my question is, where do those sorts of issues fit into this? So it comes down to where do those sorts of measures fit into this, and where does that particular example fit into here? Or has that still not been addressed?
No, that's on one of my next slides.
Okay, so thank you for that. So my other question is too, in relation to the likes of Mahara Gallery, I suppose, you know, you hear me talk, that to me, just reporting back is not adequate. It's actually being able to say, we're reporting back and these are the measures that we need to attain. And I agree in terms of, you know, the art side of it, you know, we can't say so much about that. But when it comes to the amount of money that this council puts in, you know, we can actually look at, you know, our return and our investment. And I think that's the type of thing that we can be adding
I'll forward
into
you a
there.
director's report that the trust board receives. Liz will be familiar with them, so will David. That report against a suite of exhaustive performance measures, and they happen, is it quarterly, I think, or every meeting, just about, it seems. I mean, it's the reporting back already with the existing funding that council gives the gallery is extensive, and council staff are working on how that agreement is even more robust into the future. So I wouldn't just look at this one little performance measure here, which is part of the broader picture of council, and think that that's the only way that it's reported back. It's very robust, already has been very robust in terms of the funding, previous funding agreement, and will get more robust into the future.
So as I was saying, it's not so much about the actually reporting back, it's about ensuring that what they said that they were going to do or what they agreed that was going to be done is actually occurring. And it sounds like the
But
work's
that's what a
been done.
report back does. That is exactly the purpose of a report back, is to ensure that the action has taken place, right?
Yeah,
I'm not
well,
quite understanding your point.
It's a case of where, so the measures obviously are already there, so it wouldn't be difficult to include those if it was deemed appropriate. And I know obviously you have an interest in this area, Janet. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I have
Sorry,
some-
can I just make,
Not quite understanding what you meant by that, Jocelyn. I'll just pretend you didn't say it, and I'll move on to Nigel.
Yeah, the one thing I would mention is when it comes to measuring things, the success or otherwise of them, art galleries are a little bit standalone. Art galleries aren't supposed to make money.
As chair, I'm just going to say we're getting bogged down in the Mahara Gallery Trust stuff.
I'd just
think
like to-
I've already
yeah.
responded more than I should, and I want to
Yeah.
move on from the conversation
Yeah.
about Mahara. Every long-term plan workshop, we seem to be getting bogged down in it, and we've spent quite a lot of time on this slide in general. So please focus on that right-hand box. Is there anything you want to change? Other than that, we're moving on.
Yeah, I just want to finish my point. And the point is, when you have performance measures, you're not measuring everything equally. And I use Mahara Gallery as an example. Art galleries aren't measured in the same way that you would measure a park or you would measure other stuff. They have independent measures because they have independent deliverables. So if people want to get stuck into an art gallery because it's, you have to be careful what you're measuring it against. That's what I'm saying. That's
Yeah,
my
it's a
point.
really good point, actually. Shelley?
Just one thing with the CWB, the level of service measure, it's more than just people using it. It's visitor experience, tourism and stuff. I don't know how you'd measure that. Who's using it? Why are
So
they
this
using it?
isn't all the performance measures, this is only the additional ones. I'm sure there are ones around that as well, would I be right?
I think what I want to say here is back to, I think, the Mayor's earlier point about talking to activity managers and making sure that we can measure and do the things we're doing. We've noted down measures of interest. We've tried to focus on what we can do now. And in fact, counting the number of people using the CWB is a new thing we can do because we're putting, are they called clickers, guys? We're putting counters in. Yeah, the counters in. So that's something new that we haven't previously been able to do. So for us, that's a fantastic new measure, and we've noticed down the interest in going forward additional things that you would like to see, which may or may not be appropriate for use here, but might be reported elsewhere.
Great, I think we're ready for the next slide. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, we'll go to Kathy.
With your clickers, is it also recording the speed of cyclists along the CWB that are knocking over older people?
Mike's shaking his head no. Yeah. I'm going to the next slide.
We'll
Here
move
I
on to
go.
the next slide. Moving on.
So this was leading into your question about we might have added in some things and did we take some things out, and this is just a summary view. So before we talked about the core activities being infrastructure, services, partnership, regulatory and district planning, organisational health, you can see them down the left hand side. This is just a summary of LOS's level of service measures and impact measures down the bottom. So there's 72 level of service measures and 40 impact measures. You'll see that the majority of level of service measures are infrastructure. That links back to my comment about mandatory measures that we have to report. They are set by central government and we're required to report them in the long-term plan and annually, obviously, in our annual report. We have deleted 38 measures.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I just put out the slide for people who are like, oh, what have you taken out? The majority of them are the resident opinion survey measures that we weren't able to say why they went up and down. So we do want to note that we are going to come back to you around, so what should we report? So there's some options and opportunities to move away from the resident opinion survey and into some other surveys if that makes sense as we develop our new sort of wider framework. Things like trust and confidence surveys, quality of life surveys, and happiness surveys. It doesn't mean it all ends up in this report. I just wanted to note we are very interested in what the community has to say. Their feedback to us is just we did not think this was a good tool for this document, and that was based on your feedback from conversations we've had. you'll see that there are a series of other measures that have been taken out. This is because they didn't meet the SMART criteria in some instances, so they might not have been reliable, so we couldn't report them the same way, or they might not have been specific enough, just as an example. So you can see here what we've taken out. One of the measures that we took out, Jocelyn, to your point before, was down in regulatory and district planning, the actions of the Kapiti Coast Economic Development Strategy and Implementation Plan are delivered. We took that out because it was a nonsense measure and it didn't report what we were doing, and we talked about that in the last annual report discussion. So as we're going, we are taking feedback from you and looking to replace them with measures we can use now, and we will develop new ones in some places.
Great.
Are we pausing? No, we're going to keep going. Okay, and just to summarise this is just a view by outcome, so you can see how many measures we're focusing on for place, partnership and people. So for place, 31 of the levels of service measures are in place and 13 impact measures are in place. For partnership, there's 21 level of service measures, and for impacts measures, there's 12, and for people, level of service measures of around 20 and the impact measures of 15. So what I wanted to just point out on the slide is there's an even balance of focus and measures for our 3 community outcome areas of place, partnership and people. The reason there's more level of service measures under place is because of our mandatory measures, not because we've chosen to report more. So that's just to describe that, really. Happy for me to keep going?
We've got Jocelyn with a light on. Did you have a question,
I've
Jocelyn?
had a question
Or a
for
comment?
a while. So on page 17, in terms of the infrastructure, so the number of there's a number of detailed measures there that have been deleted. You made the comment that some of these are going to be replaced. I actually think that some of those ones there that are being deleted are actually very important measures, particularly with climate change and our increases in population growth. My question is, if they are going to be deleted and not replaced, well, basically, how many of these are going to be deleted and replaced with something else, with a more so-called more meaningful measure?
I'm going to say the list that's here has been deleted, and I'm going to hand over to Sean. Did you have any comments, Sean? Well, I mean, there's the ones in infrastructure. No, he doesn't. Well, if we're going to look at developing any additional measures, we don't have them now, might be the point I'd make. Did you have anything to add to that, Sean?
No. So some of them, though, we will continue to obviously monitor that. They're not, they're removed from reporting, but that's not saying we're not going to. So peak water consumption, we continue to do that. You know, there's a lot of things in there that we will be doing anyway, but they're not necessarily going to be reported through this process, some of them.
Great. So Jocelyn will be able to report them. So as monitoring information. So when they're not lost. But some of the reasons that we had removed measures was around SMART criteria. So in
Do you want
places.
to go through what SMART criteria is again? Just
Right. So SMART
sure
stands
we're-
for specific, measurable, attributable, reliable, and timely. That's it.
That was a test.
It was a test. I got it. Woo. But it's the reliability factor. And what reliability is around is often either the way it's collected, that it might be the process that that sits underneath how we report. So there's a bunch of reasons. I don't for these specifically know which ones of the SMART criteria we had discounted them by, but if you're interested, we can come back to you.
So I suppose I actually am still very concerned that the ones in this infrastructure area being removed, and I suppose particularly the second to bottom one, which is response to the impacts of coastal erosion and inundation, when we're going through this Takatai Kapiti process, because we're doing that because it is deemed to be an issue, and yet here we are saying we're actually not going to.
My guess is that is quite a vague measure, which isn't really measurable.
But it's not being replaced. That's why I asked about them being
I
replaced.
know specifically what that is. Takatai Kapiti ends in 24-20, and this year, it will not exist in 24-25.
Yeah.
That measure was about Te Katai Kapiti, so we have removed it. There are subsequent measures that have been added in, which are around next steps for Te Katai Kapiti and the long list that you have. So that has been taken out specifically because if I had to say around timeliness, it was time limited and that time is now ended. So it's no longer relevant to be included as a measure, as an example.
Okay.
Sean has something to say.
Okay.
But in the long list at the end of the paper, there are still measures around investing in coastal infrastructure.
Absolutely.
So more
Specific and measurable?
than that particular one. So those are retained.
Maybe look at the long list, Jocelyn, and see if you feel like you still have a concern
So
after the
there's
briefing.
one thing about investing, but it's actually monitoring to make sure it's working.
Are there ones about monitoring in there too, Sean?
Yeah, I'd have to check the wording, but if seawalls are falling over or if you're not renewing them, then it's relatively obvious that there's going to be a problem there.
So the short answer is yes, we do have those measures in the long list. That is at the back.
Yeah, so can I suggest you have a wee look through there
Okay.
if you're concerned, Jocelyn, and see if you still have an issue.
Yeah. So my other matter I wanted to raise about is removing the residents' survey, opinion survey. So having sat through a number of those surveys, I think there's questions around some of the specific questions, not the whole survey. And it seems that the whole survey is now being removed.
I think the premise for removing these is because back to that SMART criteria, being specific and measurable and attributable, that doesn't meet those requirements. So I have sat with my colleagues during annual report sessions where we've had a conversation about why something's gone up or down, and you look to us and we're not able to respond because we don't know why. And then the next quarter it goes the opposite way and we don't know why because we've continued to do the same thing. So we've tried to put measures in where if it goes up or down, we can say, yep, something's happened and you can hold us to account. So opinion surveys or trust and confidence surveys or quality of life surveys are really important. And it's just, we want to make sure we've got them in the right place, that we do come back and share that information with you, but not to put it in a place where you're asking us to explain why things are changing and we can't respond, because that means we don't know what our attribution to that change is.
Oh, you've done what you should do. Fine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Continue?
Moving on, yep.
We had already done the slides, so I'm going to keep going again. Great. So the takeouts from today's session. So the Council and Community Board initiatives, we're coming back to you on the 7th. I said agree, but it was the not around the strategic framework, noting that you said, hey, we might want to zhuzh some of that wording, so we'll come back to you on that. But the important thing was you can see the 3 lead outcomes of people, place and partnership, the 10 priorities, and your annual actions. So that lines up to what you've been working on since February. Agree, take that as the not, that the performance framework is linked to that strategic framework. So that's 3 lead outcomes and achieving the 10 priorities. We talked through the new impact measures that we have introduced to report progress against your priority. And yes, many of them replace the residents' opinion survey. Service performance measures there against your activity, and there's a mix of mandatory and some improved measures which you have contributed to, and we thank you for that. Further discussion in December on the rates reductions could change the service levels, which I'd mentioned earlier in this briefing. It will depend on the impact of fees and charges review and the financial wrap-up.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
I'm assuming that as we're changing some of these measures, our auditors are going to have a say in this process?
We will be talking to our auditors, and behind the scenes, we have to have a bunch of work around data definitions, the logic that sits with things, the validity of the measures, the SMART assessment, etc. Yep.
Because I know that was something that they raised with some of our measures. They had concerns about in terms of the audit report, right?
That's true,
Yep.
yeah.
So we're very mindful of that. And we will be talking to our auditors about the current suite of measures we have, the improvements we're planning to make, and where we know we need to do some things around our current measures. So that's part of the stuff we do in the background, but
Okay.
definitely part of the conversation.
So the potential is that some of these changes we make, the auditor might not be happy with, so we have to go back to the drawing board on them?
If that happens, we will let you know, but we're having a good discussion with our auditors around the fact that we can measure them. They can be validated. Some of them can be validated externally, or that we've got our process set out so that they can test it, that it meets the SMART criteria, that there's clear logic between why we've picked them and how it reports against our activity, if it's new or it's existing, it should already, and our impacts, how that contributes to our progress against the outcomes. So we'll be working in the background on that in January, February, and then we'll come back round to you if there's any feedback.
Would they pick up if there were important ones missing, such as the ones we've pulled out? Would we, like Jocelyn was concerned, that we might be exposing ourselves to inundation risk or coastal hazard risk?
Sure, and I think, and this is just my experience from working in these spaces previously, the reality is sometimes there's things you want to measure but you don't have the information or you don't collect it. And so that's part of that longer term process of saying we know where our gaps are, we've got a plan where we're going to close those gaps if they exist. But I mean, the LTP overall is meant to report against the main things you do and how you're using your funding to achieve outcomes for the community. So there's that broader picture to look at as well. So undoubtedly there'll be things that we need to work on, and there were last year and there will be the next year, but it's the idea that we'll have a plan to work on the things that we, if we need to, essentially. I've got one last slide.
Yep.
If I may.
Let's do that.
Well, we're covering on the 7th of December. So we're going to be tabling the targets for each change impact and level of service performance measure. I did want to say to you, just in advance of that, we're intending to circulate that to you in advance. However, we are proposing in the main that our performance levels from last year will be the same for this year because of the conversations with you around the fact that 12% kept the lights on in most places. And I did mention earlier, possibly not transport, but we'll come back and talk to you further about that. Discussing the next steps for the Council and Community Board initiatives, we touched on that earlier. Really, we're coming back to say we've had a look at those. Where do they fit in the council work programme? And what does that mean for our 12%, essentially? Is it any more? Rating system review recommendations, and then there will be any updates to the financials and high-level discussions of the next focus steps.
Could we also have an update then on some of the things that have been floating around in emails that have been identified in the interim?
Is that in the Council and Community Board initiatives section?
No. Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So, look, that absolutely is the intention. So, we will obviously focus on the initiatives, but plus all those other items that have been floating around with the emails. So, things, Waikanae Beach Hall, the Trails Trust, all those bits. There was a list that was circulated today, so we will come back on those items as well on the 7th.
Yeah, there have been some hot topics that didn't get
on the list.
Captured, yeah.
And what we'll do, helpfully, is just test that against the longer list of initiatives that didn't make it to the shortlist, just to bring you back to the process that we started, so we can test and check in. That one of the things we talked about was that there's this year, next year, the year after, and 10 years as well.
Exactly.
And so making sure we just look at, is it already on the longer list and does it need to be brought forward? So on the 7th, we'll be able to come back and just check in on that with you.
Yeah, we just do it is a time when even if we made a long list and a short list 2 weeks ago, stuff can happen in between, and we need to
Absolutely.
make sure, because people start to become aware that the long-term plan's happening and start to approach us and make cases for other things that we might want to capture, if not this year, then further down the track. Nigel?
No, it's okay.
Thank you. So we're going to take a break now. Yeah, 3:15, and then we'll have a councillor-only session before 4 o'clock.
Can I actually ask a question about, so I'd like to ask, so Mark, thank you for